الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين أما بعد فأعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم إن الله وملائكته يصلون على النبي يا أيها الذين آمنوا صلوا عليه وسلموا تسليما اللهم صل على سيدنا ومولانا محمد وعلى آل سيدنا ومولانا محمد وبارك وسلم صلاة وسلام عليك سيدي يا رسول الله صلى الله تعالى عليك وسلم. Inshallah, this week will be slightly different to the normal way that we perform the dars. Inshallah, this week, especially what's going on in the world at the moment with both the COVID-19 pandemic and more recently what's happening in America, I thought it would be befitting for us today to discuss what Islam and the take of Islam upon the issues of racism, equality, and these issues that attack the modern world today. Firstly, we must understand that Islam is a complete way of life. And we hear scholars say this all the time, that Islam covers all aspects of life. What does this actually mean? For us today, we just see Islam as a spiritual connection to Allah and our connection to the deen. That's all we see as Islam. But in reality, Islam is not only this, but Islam is also Islam has its own political system, its own financial system, its own governing system. Islam has a system for every single path of life. So Islam is not just a religion, but it is an ideology, it is a concept that covers everything and every part of your life. It's unfortunate that today, for many of us, it's only a spiritual connection to Allah, and even that it is only found in a few people, that the spiritual connection. And most of us are actually just Muslim by name, because we do not understand the power of Islam in terms of these concepts. And for today's day and age, the matters of equality or racism and these kinds of issues, Islam also has a take on these as well. We find in the final public sermon of the Prophet ﷺ, when he was in Mecca, he mentioned many things to the people, and there's one thing that he mentioned, and I'm sure that many of us have heard of this as well, where the Prophet ﷺ, he tells us, or he speaks to the companions, and he says, "O people, there is not anyone that is higher than another unless he is high in obedience to Allah." And then he further mentions, he goes into detail as well. He says that there is no Arab is superior than a non-Arab, no non-Arab is superior to an Arab. And then he also mentions that, and this is exactly what we should understand today as well, especially what's going on today. He says that no white has superiority over a black, and no black has superiority over a white, unless it is in taqwa, in piety, in God-fearingness. This was how the Prophet ﷺ, he addressed a lot of the Sahaba. They all went for Hajj, and just before they began to do tawaf of the Kaaba, the Prophet ﷺ, he addresses them all with this. He addresses many of the companions, and he tells us, one of the most important things that he tells us is that no person is any superior than another person except for their taqwa, except for their piety. And straight after the khutbah, the Prophet ﷺ, he received the revelation from Allah. Straight away he received some verses from the Quran, and the verse was that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he says that on this day I have perfected for you your religion and completed my favor upon you, and I've chosen Islam as your way of life. This is mentioned in Surah Ma'idah, the 3rd verse. So we understand that straight after this khutbah of the Prophet ﷺ, Allah only then does he send this verse that he has completed the religion for us. So in this way we understand the take Islam has in terms of racism, and in terms of how we as Muslims, we should not at all be racist. This is something completely abolished by Islam, and it's not found within Muslims. It's unfortunate that some people who claim to be Muslims, they also speak out, or they also, hate other races and other people as well. This is something which is not seen in Islam. And the Messenger of Allah ﷺ, he also teaches us in a hadith, because before I mentioned the hadith, we find in America, and maybe here as well, I think I saw that people are now beginning to protest against white superiority, or how black people or minorities are being abused, or their rights have been taken away. And this is rightly so, where we fight for the rights of each other. We should also speak out. We should fight for the rights of each individual, not just a group, but every single individual that exists. We should fight for every single right. The Prophet ﷺ tells us in a hadith, and this hadith is also very common, we find this in many places. The Prophet ﷺ says that whosoever amongst you sees anything wrong or sees anything objectionable by the standards of Sharia, then you should change it with his hand. He should change it with his hand. And if he cannot do this, then he should change it with his tongue. And if he cannot change it with his tongue, then he should at least detest it. He should hate this action within his heart. And this is the weakest form of faith. And this hadith sharif has been mentioned in Muslim. Now, many muhaddithin, they have mentioned in regards to this hadith that when the Prophet ﷺ, when he mentioned that you should change it with your hand, he's referring to the governments and people in political power, or people in power at this day and age, or in that day and age, where if they see something wrong, it is down to the government to actually change it. And then for people to speak out against an action with their tongue, the scholars mention that this is down to the ulama, this is down to the scholars and the imams to speak out against this. And for those who are left, they should at least detest it in the heart. But in today's day and age, things have slightly changed as well. And protesting is one common way, or petitions are also a common way, where we raise our voices, or where you speak out against certain issues. We find in another hadith, the Prophet ﷺ, he mentions, or he addresses the companions, and he says, to assist your brother, he tells us to assist your brother, whether he be an oppressor or whether he be the oppressed. Now, this hadith you might find quite strange. You say, why would the Prophet ﷺ tell us to help someone if he's the oppressor? An oppressor is someone who damages people, at least he abuses people. So a Sahabi, he asked the Prophet ﷺ, O Messenger of Allah, if I see someone who's oppressed, then surely I will help him. But if he is the oppressor, how should I help him? Why should I help him? Because if someone is oppressing someone, then he is abusing someone's rights. He might be, he's criminal as well to be an oppressor. So Sahabi, he asked the Prophet ﷺ, and the Messenger of Allah ﷺ, he replied by saying, to help your brother who is the oppressor, you should help him by stopping him from doing the oppression. Yeah, in this way you will be helping him, not only in this life, but you'll also be helping him in the hereafter as well. This hadith is mentioned in Bukhari and Muslim as well. So from this hadith we learn that the Prophet ﷺ, he tells us to help every single individual. And for each individual, there's a different way you can help someone. In this hadith, we find that to help an oppressed person is to help him from the oppression, is to help save him or save his life. Whereas to help an oppressor is to save him and stop him from doing the oppression, from committing the acts of oppression. And we find during the life of the Prophet ﷺ that he did not differentiate between each of the companions on the basis of what they looked like, or where they were from, or what their lineage was, or who their parents was, or who their children was. Rather, the only time the Prophet ﷺ would differentiate amongst people would be in terms of their rank and in terms of their taqwa or piety of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So we find in the life of the Prophet ﷺ that he respected each individual. In fact, we find in the Quran, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَمَا أَرْسَلْنَاكَ إِلَّا رَحْمَةً لِلْعَالَمِينَ, that the Prophet ﷺ was not sent except as a mercy to all of mankind. To every single individual, the Prophet ﷺ was a mercy. And we also find in the seerah that before the Prophet ﷺ went for a conflict, before he fought somebody, he would always try and speak peacefully with someone. So for example, during the time the Prophet ﷺ was in Medina, there were many Jews that used to live in Medina. And before the Prophet ﷺ he was forced actually to defend the city of Medina from the Jews. Before this happened, the Prophet ﷺ took many times and many opportunities to speak with the Jews and to at least to bring the message of Islam towards them. It was only until the Jews decided to plan and attack Medina that the Prophet ﷺ had to defend himself and his companions, and it's only then that the battle began. For example, the Battle of Khaybar. This was only due because this only happened because the Prophet ﷺ had to defend Medina, to defend the children, women of Medina, to defend the companions, and to defend the message of Islam. It's only for this reason that the Prophet ﷺ fought in the Battle of Khaybar. We also find that in many times of the life of the Prophet ﷺ, he tried to reconcile between many individuals. The Quraysh especially, and the tribes before Islam came, these people would fight over any small matter. Every single, if someone swore against somebody, then two tribes would go to war just through this small action. And one time the Kaaba, it was damaged because there was a flood in Medina. There's a flood in Mecca, and the Kaaba was damaged. And the Quraysh and many other tribes, they knew the importance of the Kaaba because back then they used to saw their idols, and it was the center of worship for them as well at that time. So the tribes of Mecca and the Quraysh especially, they started arguing with one another because they built up the Kaaba, but there's one part that was left to place in the Kaaba, and this was the Hajar al-Aswad, the black stone from Jannah. And the Quraysh and all the other tribes, they began arguing with one another because each person wanted to put the blessed stone in its place. So one old man, one wise man, he said that we leave this, and tomorrow the first person to enter the Haram, we will ask him and he will resolve our matter. So then the next morning, the Quraysh and the other tribes, they waited eagerly for the first person to enter into the Haram. The first person to enter was Sayyidina Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. This was before he declared Nubuwwah. This is before he declared his prophethood. And at this point, the Quraysh and the other tribes, they looked upon him and they said, yes, this is the best person to resolve this matter. Because he is Al-Amin, he's a Sadiq, and he looks for the best in every single individual. So they go to him, and the Prophet ﷺ says that he asked someone to get him a cloth, a big chadar, a cloth. And then he says that each elder, an elder from each of these tribes should hold on to the edges of this cloth. And then the Prophet ﷺ, he placed the Hajar Aswad onto the middle of the cloth. And he said, now we will carry the cloth from wherever, we will carry the Hajar Aswad from wherever it was towards the Kaaba. So in this way, each tribe and the Quraysh also had a role in placing the Hajar Aswad into the Kaaba. And then the Prophet ﷺ, once he reached the Kaaba, he himself with his blessed hands, he placed the Hajar Aswad into the Kaaba and he left it there. And this way he resolved the issue and disputes amongst the people. The Quraysh, they were about to go to war just over this small matter. And the Prophet ﷺ, he quickly averted this and he diverted this scenario to, he brought peace instead of having war. And now in mention of what's going on in America in regards to how white people are seen as more superior than the black people, we find that in Islam this is completely forbidden. This is haram, in fact, to differentiate once again upon the color of your skin or your ethnicity. We find that one of the Sahabi of the Prophet ﷺ, his name was Sayyidina Bilal radiallahu ta'ala anhu. He was a companion of the Prophet ﷺ who was from Ethiopia or Abyssinia, and he was dark in complexion. He was black, and the Prophet ﷺ, before Sayyidina Bilal radiallahu anhu accepted Islam, he was the slave of Abu Jahl. And Abu Jahl Utbah. He was the slave of Utbah, and Utbah would torture Sayyidina Bilal many, many times. He would torture him, he would whip him, and if Sayyidina Bilal radiallahu anhu did not do his job properly, then he would be admonished severely for this. And once the Prophet ﷺ proclaimed prophethood, Sayyidina Bilal radiallahu anhu, he accepted Islam, and he had such piety. He was one of the most God-fearing of the companions, to such an extent that when Utbah heard that Sayyidina Bilal radiallahu anhu had accepted Islam, he took Sayyidina Bilal radiallahu anhu to the desert. And this is in Arabia, where the sun is scorching and it's very, very hot, especially in the desert as well, where the sand will be burning as well. So he made Sayyidina Bilal radiallahu anhu lay on the floor, or lay on the sand, and he placed some rocks on the chest of Sayyidina Bilal radiallahu anhu. And he told Sayyidina Bilal, "Oh Bilal, you either come back to polytheism, you reject Islam, or I will leave you here." And he placed these rocks on him as well. Yet Sayyidina Bilal radiallahu anhu, he did not reject Islam. Rather, this strengthened his faith even more, and he shocked the kuffar at that time. This was Sayyidina Bilal radiallahu anhu, and his piety was such a level that we should admire, and we should come to this state. This should be an inspiration for us as well. The Prophet ﷺ, he, with one action, one beautiful action, he completely abolished racism in Islam. One thing that he did, he made Sayyidina Bilal radiallahu anhu, he made him the muazzin, the caller to namaz, the caller to salah. And at one point in the life of Sayyidina Bilal radiallahu anhu, the Prophet ﷺ told him to stand on top of the Kaaba and call azan from there. With this one action, the Prophet ﷺ had abolished racism, because you see all the other companions, they would see that Sayyidina Bilal radiallahu anhu is on top of the Kaaba. And the Kaaba is where every single individual, every single Muslim, 5 times a day, he will pray towards that direction. Yet the Prophet ﷺ made Sayyidina Bilal radiallahu anhu stand on top of the Kaaba and call the azan from there. Not only, there are 2 things that we find in this. That one, the Prophet ﷺ, he mentioned in the hadith that if those people, if you know the rank and the good deeds you will attain from calling the azan, then each one of you will fight amongst one another to call the azan. You will draw swords, and you will fight amongst each other once you hear about the beauties and the rewards of becoming a muazzin, of being the caller to prayer. And the Prophet ﷺ, he elected Sayyidina Bilal radiallahu anhu to be the caller to prayer, to be the muazzin during his time. And not only this, but he made Sayyidina Bilal radiallahu anhu stand on top of the Kaaba and call the azan from there. So every single individual in Makkah, they will see that Sayyidina Bilal radiallahu anhu, who was initially a slave before, and he's also a person from Africa, they all saw that this person was given this rank by the Prophet ﷺ. So undoubtedly, all the people, every single individual is given rights. Every single individual is given rights, and they're all given the same rights. Nobody's rights are lower in terms of Islam, except unless that person, so we hear in another hadith, the Prophet ﷺ says that unless that person is your relative, or if he's a neighbor, then these ranks go like this: your neighbor or your relative. And in another hadith, the Prophet ﷺ, in terms of the virtues of Sayyidina Bilal radiallahu anhu, he says that, the Prophet ﷺ, he said that I had a vision of Jannah, and I saw that Bilal radiallahu anhu, he was entering Jannah before I did. And this is what the Prophet ﷺ was saying. Now Sayyidina Bilal radiallahu anhu, after hearing this, he says that, what actions have I done? What have I done to attain this rank that the Prophet ﷺ has seen me enter Jannah before himself? And then the Prophet ﷺ says that, oh Bilal, you have such a rank that whenever you perform wudu, so you're always in the state of wudu, that whenever you break your wudu, straight away you will go perform your wudu again. And it is due to this action alone that you will enter into Jannah. You enter into Jannah because of this. Now we find that the Prophet ﷺ didn't say it because of your skin color, or because where you're from, or because who your parents are. No, but he said the Prophet ﷺ because of your actions. The Prophet ﷺ said that because of your actions, this is your rank. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala allow us to act upon as we said today. And may He also allow us to perform righteous actions and become greater Muslims. وَمَا عَلَيْنَا إِلَّا الْبَلَاغُ الْمُبِينُ وَالْحَمْدُ لِلَّهِ رَبِّ الْعَالَمِينَ.